2 years ago, Mexican President Felipe Calderón launched a major offensive against drug traffickers. The campaign, which is now partially funded by the U.S., has sparked an all-out war. Drug cartels are fighting the army, police, and one another in order to control lucrative smuggling routes into the United States. But for many Mexicans, the war has meant something else, a complete breakdown of law and order and a spike in violence. Last year, there were more than 6,000 bodies buried in Mexico, and this year, the rate is increasing. The effects of the drug war on America's border go beyond the number of dead. Whole sections of the city are being terrorized by the violence. Residents are fleeing, and those remaining are asking why. Everyone in Ciudad Juarez knows what it means when the twin white vans pull up in a neighborhood. Another dead body has been found. Here, 2 bodies were found on the sidewalk, shot to death, as they almost always are. Yvette del Carmen Llanos lives a block away and heard the shots.
2 semanas de estar viviendo aquí. Y el día que llegamos a vivir creo que también hubo problemas por aquí. Ayer mataron a uno también allá anoche, ayer en la tarde. Encontraron al que está acá, uno en el lote baldío.
In February, there were more than 220 murders here, the most of any city in Mexico, and the rate is rising. They're almost all drug-related.
Pues va a pintar.
Empezamos bien mal, ¿eh?
Teníamos 2 minutos de entrar y ya teníamos el primero, estos 2. Esperamos que no sea tan pesado.
But Gustavo Ruiz's days have almost all been intense, at least during the last year.
Pero hasta 9 muertos, 10, ¿no? Más, ¿verdad? 10, 11 homicidios en un turno nos ha tocado.
Gustavo is part body collector, part crime scene investigator. He is part of the team that does a basic forensic investigation of the scene and then loads the bodies into the familiar white vans. The evidence is then processed here. Everything from shell casings and fingerprints to murder weapons.
Also the weapons.
The modern facility is straight out of the TV show CSI. The irony is that despite all the effort, the perpetrators of the violence, the war and drug cartels, are hardly ever brought to justice.
That is not our job. So the frustration is there, but it's not a lot because we are solving the question that investigator wants to know. So that's their job.
A corrupt court system means that only a tiny number of these cases are ever brought to court, so the boxes of evidence pile up.
We are having a plan to restructure and give us more room to put all the boxes.
But there's little time here to talk about the new facilities.
Yeah. Laboratorios, personal. ¿Le escucha el Bravo?
22 is the code for a dead body. So before he can finish processing the evidence from the earlier double murder, Gustavo has to hit the road.
Últimamente, para aquel rumbo, han salido montones. Han salido montones, bastantes, como unos 15 en este mes, ahí, en ese tramo.
This murder happened within a mile of the U.S. border, along a key smuggling route. The driver of the car somehow survived the attack and was taken away by ambulance. But after only 15 minutes of investigation, the local police take off. There has been yet another shooting.
Más adelante, ahí los balacearon, a la ambulancia. Están heridos ahorita. Hay un herido y un muerto.
This body is the driver who initially survived the earlier shooting. The perpetrator stopped the ambulance and finished him off. For 3 full hours, he lay dead on this major thoroughfare because there was yet another murder that Gustavo had to investigate. In this case, the man was killed by a machine gun, and from the crime scene, Gustavo detects something suspicious.
Sabemos que hay sangre y hay proyecciones de sangre donde nos dice que posiblemente hubo otra persona, pero no lo tenemos en físico, no sabemos dónde está.
They would later find out that the other victim was not a he, but a she, an innocent 9-year-old girl who got caught up in the crossfire and was killed. Back at his office, Gustavo shifted over, but he still has to do paperwork and check the corpses for gunpowder residue.
Serían 3, 4, como 7, llevamos 8, más o menos, en el día, 8. Es un día con trabajo, con bastante trabajo, pero todavía ha habido con más trabajo, el doble de trabajo todavía.
He doesn't know it yet, but the next day's total will top more than 20 bodies.
A usted la veo afectada. Imagínese a mí que lo hago todo el año, todos los días. Ya me hubiera vuelto loco.
Sylvia Ruiz Lopez prefers to sit behind her locked front gate. She used to venture outside, taking strolls through the neighborhood, visiting family and friends, but no more, not since last summer when her son, Alejandro, was killed.
En veces yo me siento que, pues no, en veces yo le digo a mis hijas, yo ya quiero irme también, le digo, porque yo siempre me ha sido muy duro esto.
Lopez's daughters live nearby and comfort their mother, but they always sit inside.
Soñé que yo iba, quién sabe cómo iba yo así en una calle. Cuando yo volteé y que me dijo él, mamá, tengo mucho frío, me decía. Pero yo le miraba su cara muy bonita y con esa blanca se la miraba. Estoy a llorar y llorar. En eso que ya empecé a llorar y lloré, pues desperté luego.
But what haunts Lopez are not the reoccurring dreams of her son, pictured here on the left, or the fears that she has for the 2 children he left behind. It's the fact that she'll probably never find out what happened to her son.
Acta de función dice que murió por estrangulamiento. O sea que no murió todavía con las heridas, las 10 cuchilladas que le dieron en el estómago. Y luego le metieron un calcetín en la boca, de su mismo calcetín.
The family says that Alejandro was last seen in police custody. Honest or corrupt police, they can't say for sure. But they insist he was not involved in drug trafficking, although he did have some problems with a neighborhood gang. Did the police kill him? Did they turn him over to the gang? Is the information about the cops even true? In most places, his murder would be investigated and maybe solved. Lopez says that there has been no investigation, and in Ciudad Juarez, that's not unusual.
Que no se resuelve nada, y pensar, a diario yo veo las noticias y pensar que a diario pasa pasa a otras gentes lo que uno pasó, porque es muy feo.
Like many others here, she blames President Felipe Calderón for starting a war with the drug traffickers. Violence and trafficking has always existed in Juarez for decades, but only in the last year has the lawlessness totally spun out of control.
Resulta que ahora hasta gente que no ande en eso matan. Ya cualquiera ya trae pistola, ya cualquiera ya agarra a uno y ya lo mata. No necesita que ande en drogas, o sea que están, yo digo, aprovechando la ocasión.
This was the second threat Jorge Luis received. It was last November, and another journalist had just been killed. So he wasn't going to take any chances. Like many other Mexicans with enough money, he and his family fled Ciudad Juarez, crossed the Rio Grande River, and settled in El Paso, Texas. Now he runs the most popular news blog in Juarez, from this room in El Paso. He's close enough to the border to communicate with undercover reporters on the other side.
Okay, pues ahí estamos pendientes de todo lo que suceda, ¿no?
His site is called La Polaca, which is a derogatory slang word for a politician. The blog is humorous and reads like a tabloid, but he says the things that everyone in Juarez is thinking, but are too afraid to say.
Una vela en el entierro, en un funeral se utilizan velas, pero en el lenguaje coloquial quiere decir que si tú tienes vela en el entierro, tienes culpa de algo, ¿sí? Estoy diciendo que el gobierno Tiene una vela en el entierro por la delincuencia y el crimen organizado, porque no se puede entender un crimen organizado sin la bendición del gobierno.
His essays are particularly harsh on local politicians and prosecutors, many of whom, he says, are corrupt. But he also got in trouble with the warring drug cartels when one side posted comments on the blog.
Si tú publicabas un cartel de determinado asesinato contra una mafia, se enojaba la mafia contraria si tú lo publicabas, y entonces ahí vinieron las amenazas.
He turned off comments completely, but the threat still came. So after a well-respected journalist, known as El Choco, was assassinated, Luis moved his whole family here, to this nondescript American tract house.
I feel safe here. Even if something happened to me here in El Paso, I know somehow it will be investigated.
Everywhere the Garcia family goes, they go together, often hand in hand. It's gotten too dangerous in Riviera del Bravo for anyone to be alone.
Todas están solas. Todas esas casas están destruidas.
This family has stayed in one of the most dangerous areas of Juarez. Most of their neighbors have already fled. They've kept up their daily routine, like sending Dad off to work, but in a rapidly deteriorating environment.
Es que ahorita la juventud, los muchachos jóvenes de 16, 17, 18 años, están andan bien destrampados, como dicen allá para México. Aquí nomás en esta etapa, viera cómo se pone en la noche.
Irma Lucia Campechano says that since the drug war heated up, the police have largely abandoned this area, as they have in other parts of Juarez. They're no match for the power of the warring drug cartels. They show up only when there's a murder. Otherwise,
todo está, ni siquiera se asoma una patrulla.
So they make do. 6-year-old Guadalupe isn't allowed outside their high walls alone, and they hope their baby pit bull will soon add another layer of protection.
Siento ello huele en mi corazón. Me mata.
In the past, the drug cartels would have left a poor family like the Garcias alone, but now lawlessness is on the rise, and kidnapping and extortion of even poor Mexicans is growing.
Siento ello huele en mi corazón así, está así. Siento así miedo.
De pelota.
Guadalupe has been exposed to violence in ways that are hard to imagine for a 6-year-old. In the previous week, there was a murder out in front of her school, where this memorial stands. And even inside school, there's little safety for these first graders. The schools are even targets of extortion.
Incluso cuando llegabas a escuelas, veías un cartelón amenazando donde se iban a secuestrar niños si no se pagaba una cierta cuota o si los maestros no daban el aguinaldo.
Joaquin Ramirez says he was not one of those extorted, and all the children here remain safe. But that's not the only challenge. Growing up in a culture of drug trafficking and the violence that goes along with it would likely affect these children.
Muchos de los papás de los niños pues son puchadores o venden droga o son cholos. Entonces los mismos niños van creciendo con esa imagen. De cierta manera ellos piensan que es normal.
So Joaquin is doing what little he can to change things. Each morning, he keeps the children spellbound with a story. Today, he's using Arabian Nights to teach the children to resist the temptation of easy money, a lesson against the lure of drug dealing.
Te va a estar preguntando cosas sobre ti y te va a estar obsequiando cosas a fin de que les des lo más precioso que ellos quieren, los peces de colores.
He hopes the stories are getting through. He says that since the violence has increased, there have been more discipline problems.
Lo que notamos nosotros como maestros es que los niños como que están notando cierto estrés y de esa manera están reflejando ciertas conductas que antes no tenían, más agresividad.
It's the end of the school day, and Guadalupe does not leave the classroom until her father comes to pick her up. Arm in arm they walk home, unsure of what the next day will bring.